A pretty conventional plot for this genre. Having lately read some stories on this topic, I wanted to react to the justifications given for a wife's behavior from the husband's point of view. I work in marketing as a specialist at the same company where my wife also works. Claire is an ambassador for client relationship, responsible for managing and enhancing client interactions and partnerships. I head the IT teams and am David. For us, everything were going absolutely fine. Well into the repairs on our fixer-upper and raising two wonderful children, Chloe 13 and Lucas 11, we were both working and content. We had a close-knit group of friends, and we lived in close proximity to our relatives. Despite our differences in appearance, we share a strong emotional bond and are well suited for each other. She has lovely blue eyes and long blonde hair at 5'9" feet. Claire has a striking Scandinavian appearance, reflecting her deep-rooted family history in Sweden, which holds sentimental value for her. She is brilliant, energetic, and never seems to stop. Having sandy hair, I stand 3 inches taller. I have a thin frame since I enjoy endurance sports, including running and cycling. Though not in a showy gym rat style, I am physically fit. Being invited to a long weekend on a private island owned by one of our clients astonished me. Our chief executive, Robert Thompson, said he and his wife Helen were accompanying certain directors and their spouses. Claire had been requested since she was the main point of contact for the customer. Though I sounded like I was there to make up the statistics, never look a gift horse in the mouth. Robert continued by saying the client was easily the largest customer of our company and filthy rich. We would go early Friday and return Monday on a private charter carrying everything we would need. Claire knew all about it when I brought it up on the way home. Having spent months working with the customer, she appeared quite impressed and was looking forward to the freebie weekend. She seemed to know nothing when I questioned her about the weekend, so I asked her about the client instead. Claire said he was Richard Sterling, guessed he was in his late 40s, looked excellent, exuded confidence, and had inherited a family fortune. She appeared a little smitten, characterizing him, among other things, as strong and under control. Perfect. He sounds like a right arrogant prick, I thought to myself, but perhaps I would save that observation for after the weekend. 2 weeks later, Friday morning saw us on a private charter plane. I must admit, I was genuinely impressed by the island and its surroundings. Should the island be all he has, he must be totally loaded. Although I had no idea what to expect, the island appeared to be several miles broad and maybe 5 miles long from what we could see as we arrived. With the main structure behind a white sandy bay creating a beautiful crescent, the 5-star resort appeared to be. Claire was ecstatic. The rest of us weren't far behind. After shown to our rooms, we met our host for lunch on a porch with a view of the bay. Though I wanted to hate him, Richard looked like a kind man. Claire had, if anything, underplayed his appearance. About him, he exuded a somewhat George Clooney aura. He told us to make ourselves totally at home and thanked us everyone for coming. We spoke with the other 3 couples from our company and met Victoria, a gorgeous brunette who I believe would be Richard's weekend date. Apart from the serving crew, the only other man there seemed to be security, hanging in the background without introduction. I began to wonder if Richard possessed the kind of enemies that called for security on a remote island. Richard welcomed Claire as an old friend, and they seemed very at ease in one another's presence. She and the others seemed to pay most of what he said second importance. Given that he was an incredibly giving host and their most valuable client, it was logical, I supposed. We spent a fantastic afternoon snorkeling, paddleboarding, and generally fooling about in the water. Free food and drink were always available, and later on we had an evening dinner with every member of the group. As we mixed in little groups, the air was laid back and welcoming. Victoria arrived and identified herself to us. She was gorgeous and spoke of growing up in England. She appeared really friendly, however, I sensed she came from a rich background. I questioned whether she needed to work or whether she was a model. She was really flirtatious, surprisingly, even in front of Claire. I brushed it off gently, attributing it to too kind behavior. The ideal environment for a romantic evening was being pampered without children, having time to unwind, and in a picturesque place. Claire particularly seemed passionate. She expressed her love for me often, and our making was passionate. That evening was the nicest one we had in a very long time. Perhaps after all, there was something to this Love Island concept. Though Claire was fast washed and eager to get to breakfast, I had hoped for a recurrence the following morning. At last I got out of bed and caught up with her while she was chatting with Robert and Richard. Robert and Claire seemed a touch tense, which made me question whether it had to do with business. Perhaps Richard was schmoozing and had spent the weekend pushing them on a project connected to his business. When I got there, the discussion stopped. After a brief lunch, we continued to have another wonderful day by the pool with others. Claire had dressed more than normal when we went to dinner on Saturday. She looked great in strappy heels and a red satin evening dress. Richard asked whether we might spare him a few minutes after supper. We agreed and went to the study under security guy trailing after. Richard noticed she sat a little away from me as he sat in a high-backed leather chair while I settled on the couch opposite him with Claire. Richard paused long, then started talking. "I have a proposal for you, David. It's of a personal nature." "Okay," I managed while being absolutely bewildered. Richard went on. "I've had the absolute satisfaction working with and getting to know Claire over these last few months. We have developed a lovely relationship and get on very brilliantly." He stopped, maybe expecting a response from me, but I had no idea where this was headed. The word relationship made me rather uncomfortable. He carried on apathetically, which is why I have a suggestion. "I want to spend the next weekend with Claire. I am naturally more than willing to make up for the time she would have spent with you. I therefore want to put £100,000 into your joint account." Thinking this had to be a joke, I started giggling and couldn't resist jibing. "Richard, you seem to be such a skinflint. For Demi Moore, Robert Redford offered £1 million. Nobody else found humor in it." "Like any plans," Richard said, "I'm more than ready to haggle over the price to acquire what I want. Victoria would also be free, so I would appreciate it if you could entertain her, please." Expecting Claire to be smiling, I turned to her, but she simply looked worried. "Not a joke, David. Richard has invited me to accompany him. We should give the invitation great thought." I wanted to pound him. Looking back, the security man was nearer. I thought about how he accomplished that. I could barely detect any movement from him at all. Richard kept on speaking. "Your wife is totally in favor of the concept, I can guarantee you. From where is the damage? We will all have a great time, and you will take away a big quantity of money." One I turned back to Claire. Perhaps Demi Moore's reluctance accounts for the price difference. Claire felt uncomfortable at that comment, but sensed not to say anything. Though I was trying furiously to think, I had to pay attention to my breathing, which was starting to cause trouble. I looked at the security man whose manner had changed entirely. He seemed alert and with good reason concentrated on my actions. I wanted to pound Richard in his smarmy face. "Your name is Worshinrao, former military, based on your appearance. Does he usually pull this garbage?" "Ryan, sir. I am not able to say on the topic. And should I attack your prick of a boss, I suppose you might kill me with your bare hands or something else like that." Ryan nodded. "Perhaps merely stop you from doing that, sir." Turning now to Richard, I replied, "It's just as well you brought him. Otherwise, I would kick the shit out of you." Richard looked not at least disturbed. "David, let us not rush things. You're writing a lot on this." Claire was the speaker that followed. "David, consider that. Just a few days later, the money would transform our lives irrevocably." I was crushed. She obviously wanted to do this and had scheduled this. "Tell me, sweetheart, after you two decided to do this, did the financial offer follow?" No answer, so I continued. "I suppose Victoria was thrown in to sweeten the offer as well." "She is a prostitute. What am I?" Richard answered, "Victoria is a personal friend of mine. She not only is affluent, but also a highly upscale escort who only takes contracts that appeal to her. You would, rest certain, go through anything unlike this world with her. I suppose it qualifies them as prostitutes both." Claire flinches once again, but no comforting words. "You can, Richard. Stuff your money up your perfumed arse." Claire then got up and displayed her actual hues. "It is my body, hence I would want to do it. Just an intriguing period in bed, and it would be great for us both to investigate with others. Though it's only that, Richard and I enjoy one other. It not alters our mutual affection. You and Victoria would surely have fun as well." I staggered and her words sank in slowly. "The difference, my beloved wife, is that I don't want anybody else. And it's way more than you indicate. This is a betrayal and colliding behind my back. I can never trust you again. And if you are prepared to do it once, why not again? Claire answered rapidly. You're overreacting. You know about it. Therefore, neither a secret nor collaboration exists. And I am speaking exactly truthfully. This is happening. Then I'll be back to be all yours. You will let me have one item if you love me. Think about what we can do with the money, holidays, with the kids, everything. Don't fucking dare use our kids as your excuse. We don't need the money, and don't assume I will take you back. Your honesty only works if we agree to something together, and the only person you've agreed with is this pompous arsehole. The money is just an excuse. You want to do this and have planned it. I guess the money and Victoria are because you didn't think I would agree. Well, you were right. Even with the money, I still don't agree, Claire continued. You're right. I do want to do this. I want to experience something different, something new, and I am attracted to Richard, but it doesn't have to hurt us. I didn't want to cheat, and you think this is better? You've already made your choice, even dressed up for him. Don't fight this, babe. You wouldn't like the consequences. What the fuck do you mean by that? Well, you wouldn't come out of it well. If you fought it or went for a divorce, you would lose everything. The house, the kids, even your job would be at risk. And there really is no need for any of that. So just accept it. It will be far easier. I'll see you tomorrow. And remember, I love you and only you. I had to get out. Breathing was becoming a real issue, and if I stayed, I was going to lose it. I stood, feeling wobbly and half staggered toward the door. I heard Claire calling my name but kept walking. As I crossed the hall, Victoria came over and gave me a hug, saying everything was going to be okay. I turned on her. And what exactly are you, the fucking consolation prize? She strode away, her head held high. I kept going, eventually making it outside and halfway across the courtyard. But I didn't feel very well. I heard footsteps behind me, disappointed to see it was Ryan, not Claire. Listen, Ryan, you really need to fuck off. I'd like to, mate, but I need to ensure you aren't going to do anything stupid. Such as? Got any ideas? Because I'm all out of them. David, you don't look too clever. Just have a seat against the wall, pull your knees up, and concentrate on taking long, slow breaths. I felt a bit weak and didn't have the energy to argue. It seemed like an eternity, but it was probably only a few minutes before I calmed down. I noticed Ryan sitting next to me. Thanks, I guess. Not sure what the fuck that was. Maybe anxiety or a panic attack. You were pretty pale, but you're looking a better shade of pink now, though. So Ryan, speaking of stupid ideas, is there any way I can get out of this shithole? Ryan replied matter-of-factly. There's no way off this island tonight. There are no boats. The plane and the pilot are off on another charter. You might be able to radio for help, but an unfaithful wife is hardly an emergency situation. Well, I'm pleased you think she's unfaithful. She doesn't seem to be grasping the concept, and I was starting to doubt myself. What the fuck should I do? I can't even kick the shit out of him because of you. Yeah, sorry about that. I wish I could step aside, but I would never get work again. Ryan continued, listen, think through what you're going to do and work out a plan. Whatever you need to do can wait until Monday. It's like in the military. Formulate a plan, sit tight, and don't tip them off about what you're going to do. The trouble is, I have no idea what I'm going to do. They seem to have covered all the bases, and I'll have to sit around and suffer tomorrow and Monday while you babysit me. After a long pause, Ryan offered, there's a supply boat that comes in early Monday morning. You could get on that if you want to avoid the plane with everyone else going home. They can't stop you. No one, myself included, wants to be up for any kidnapping or imprisonment charge. I might even come with you. This contract is losing its appeal. I don't like being on the wrong side, even if it does pay well. Okay, that helps. I just need to get through tomorrow. Tell you what, why don't we hike around the island tomorrow morning? Keep you away from all the bollocks. Also, you should think about Victoria. She's a wonderful girl, and you don't seem to have much to lose now. For tonight, you can get some shut-eye in one of the cabanas if you don't want to go back in. No, I guess our room is empty. I'll go back there. You never know, she might change her mind. She didn't, of course, but surprisingly, I did sleep. Exhaustion, I think. The next morning, I changed into some sports gear and hurried downstairs, hoping to avoid everyone and head out with Ryan. No such luck. As I entered the dining room, it went silent. I looked for something quick to eat and grabbed some fruit. There was a murmur of conversation. I could hear comments about it being fine. It's nothing. She will be back. Then the finance director, Peter Davies, and his wife approached. Listen, David, we've all been there. Just let it happen. It isn't personal. He sees other wives but moves on and is very generous. As he said it, I saw his wife's neck flush red. Just then, Claire and Richard made their appearance. She seemed absolutely delighted with herself. I'd have to say glowing if I had to describe it. At least she was until she spotted me. Her smile faded and she let go of the arsehole's hand, coming over, either to kiss or hug me. I held her back at arm's length and looked around. Dios. Christ, I thought. What a bloody idiot. Everyone knew what was going to happen before the weekend even started. What an absolute fool I have been. I went to leave. Claire began talking. Please stay, David. We can socialize with the group and have another good day together. I looked around. All eyes were on me, some in anticipation, others clearly amused by the scene. Nope, he paid for you and can keep you. But I've got something to say to the group before I go. I gather this weekend has been in the planning for some time, and you all knew, so it seems fair you all hear what I have to say. The group looked aghast, glancing nervously at each other. Robert and Helen, I would never have come to this weekend if you weren't here. It never crossed my mind that you would have colluded in something so sordid. You know and condone what he does like some sort of a sick voyeur fan club. I hope you got a kick out of blindsiding me. I noticed all of them starting to shift uncomfortably. This clearly was not in their plan. Claire burst in. You are overreacting. It was just an interesting time in bed, an adventure for one time, and it doesn't affect us. I told you I interrupted. Here we hear the first phase of the defense. That it's nothing, really. I know you've planned how I would react with the help of Captain Fuckwit there. So let's see, what did you think? I'd say phase A is, we stay here, and you get me used to what happened. Try to normalize it before we go home. Combine that with you and your friends dismissing it as nothing serious. They've already started that theme on your behalf. No doubt you think that I should not overreact, be huffy, or act childish about it. I should grow up. It's just my ego and pride after all. Of course, you know that won't work, but it's all part of the softening up process. So on to phase B. After the weekend, you let me reclaim you. We have love and lots of it. Maybe try new things. We will benefit from your liaison and be better than ever. I bet you even discussed needing to seduce me. You had better not let my feelings of loss linger on too long after all, darling. Claire glanced nervously at Richard. That comment seemed to hit the target. What's more, we will have the money he offered for you. We can spend the money you earned by taking the kids to Disneyland and meeting Mickey. Quite a few of them actually winced at that. If we are still struggling, phase C kicks in. You already planted that seed last night. If I really loved you, I would let you have this. You've been a great wife for 15 years. It's just one night. Something for you. Yeah, that might start to weaken my resolve, but what do I get after 15 years of devotion to you? Treated like shit, that's what. You knew I would never agree and railroaded me, showing a complete lack of respect. So that plan is not going to cut it. Now you're a bit worried. Maybe you had better give me time to cool off. A week or two, find me drowning my sorrows in a bar somewhere, and then plead forgiveness. This is phase D. You are really sorry for it all. You had no idea it would hurt me so much, and would never have done it if you had realized. You love me, begging, crying, the whole works. I've got to admit, you've got a chance with that one. But then, the way you just walked in hand in front of everyone, looking so delighted with yourself. It cements in my mind that there isn't really any guilt or regret, just contempt and a willingness to humiliate me. Phase D is not going to work out for you. So finally, the fallback plan might be needed. Phase E, threats. You will take all the money in the house and poison the kids against me. You already suggested I could lose my job. Richard will pay to get you the best lawyers. I will end up sad, poor, and lonely. You might even threaten to move in with him and live happily ever after with our kids. Richard's head shot up so quickly I almost laughed. Oh dear, looks like Loverboy isn't too keen on the kids, babe. Claire finally managed to find her voice. This really isn't that big of a deal, she started. Why don't we just relax and give ourselves time to think? That's phase A, Claire. We've covered that already, I remarked flatly. So why don't we save everyone the time and skip ahead to the bottom line? That's what I was thinking about last night, and my conclusion is that everyone, including the kids, will be better off if we divorce. It is much healthier than living in an unhappy home. After all, you can't be happy if you pull this shit, and I'm certainly not happy. You can try to stop me from seeing the kids, but you know I'm a good father, and good for them. They are old enough to understand. I doubt your folks and friends will support you, not after they find out what you've done. I'm not bothered by the money. That was always you. The room fell into shocked silence, everyone staring like goldfish. Any of you idiots got any more advice? Did I miss anything? No, I didn't think so. Oh yeah, one other thing. Robert, you can stick your job up your arse. I'll see you in court for that constructive dismissal case. My job being dependent on a client loving my wife seems to be just cause. With that, I strode out. The silence was palpable, broken only by Ryan, who has ever followed me. As we left, Ryan chuckled. Way to go. I see you took that advice about keeping the plan to yourself to heart then. I couldn't help but smile. Yeah, I guess I blew that idea. Ryan laughed heartily once we were outside the building. Just as well you stayed a civvy. You would have never made it in the military. Anyway, let's go. Ryan grabbed a backpack and set off up the coast at a brisk pace. A mile in, I was struggling to keep up with him and starting to wonder if this was a mistake. He shouted something from ahead about physical torture, being great at keeping your mind off mental torture. My burning muscles and lungs seemed to agree. The scenery was breathtaking, and Ryan was good company, switching from asking about me to reciting hilarious stories from his time in the British military. We were gone for hours, trekking along the northern coast and then ascending to the island's highest point in the middle. Just as I caught my breath, Ryan casually suggested we jog back, claiming it's all downhill. I struggled to keep pace, suspecting he was either supporting or tormenting me, depending on his perspective. By noon, we returned. Exhausted, I gasped to Ryan that I'd thought I was fit before today. He, hardly out of breath, generously reassured me, mentioning he'd been a PT instructor in the forces. Staggering to my room, I noticed Claire was not in our room, and I couldn't shake off the thought that she might be continuing her dealings with Richard. After a quick shower and feeling famished, I headed to the dining room, only to be disheartened by the sight of Richard and Claire there. Ryan, ever vigilant, hovered nearby, impeccably dressed in a suit that highlighted his readiness. Richard, with his usual air of confidence, began, "David, I deeply regret the way things have unfolded, and I offer you my sincere apology for the distress caused. I've never encountered this issue with my liaisons before, and I certainly don't intend to threaten your marriage. Sadly late." "You already have," I said harshly. Richard said, trying to save the matter, "I want to rescind my demand to spend tonight with your wife and raise the pay." Richard then turned over a piece of paper to me. Opening it revealed a £250,000 check. I looked at Claire. She looked to be crying. Unable to resist, I said, "You must have been quite good to earn that much, darling." Claire's eyes shot with rage. "This is not about that. We are trying to fix a catastrophic error we committed. Richard is a perfect gentleman and really worries about your response." I laughed, unable to help but remark, "Your conception of a flawless gentleman appears quite fluid. At least did he say thanks after your fascinating stay in bed?" "Don't be facetious, David," Claire shot back. "We had a misinterpretation here. We misinterpreted your expected response. For both of us, this was once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Claire made a sacrifice to guarantee a better life for you and the kids. Thus, you should be appreciative. Misunderstanding?" I laughed scornfully. "About your scheme, I was rather explicit about my opinions. Still, you both decided to press forward despite, stopping only once you had what you wanted. You have, however, also underestimated this movement." I then tore up the check. "I only kept you from being a simple David, sweetie. That just leaves the bit regarding being a cheating slut. I'm not convinced that's fixable. This time Claire started crying right away. I went to Fellows, my voice tinged with incredulity. Why then do you do this? Is it about thrills of taking someone else's wife or control? In any case, it simply makes you a depressed man's excuse. You were 48? Still, you act like a young child grabbing objects just because you can. Surely you have more worthwhile things to concentrate on. Richard laughed at it. I manage an overseas company and donate millions to charity. I have enough to occupy me. From what I looked at last night, you inherited that company, and under your direction, it has been getting smaller. And regarding charitable attendance at galas, and funders have to be such a challenge. When was the last time you really assisted another human being and got your hands filthy? I question whether you possess that. You're too self-absorbed and too occupied playing games with people's life. Making plans this weekend for everyone to know, it must be the humiliation that gets you off. I'm sorry, Claire, but it wasn't entirely driven by your want. Among a line of conquests, you are only one. Why not you try growing up and developing a true relationship with someone? Using your riches, stop acting like a total moron. Feeling relieved at finding someone who seemed to understand, I walked up to Victoria on the beach. I apologize about last night. I started. Victoria glanced up from her reading, her grin real and friendly. She interrupted, clearly not seeing any need. I was told you would take the given deal. Should I have known, I never would have approached you. Your response made perfect sense, and your breakfast speech was really excellent. Not one could have agreed more. Claire started crying when you departed, and I never had seen Richard looking so ashamed. Every minute of it was wonderful. Oh, sorry, considering what you are dealing with, I shouldn't be saying that. I laughed in spite of myself. There is no need to apologize. Hearing someone be sincere about it is actually rather refreshing. Victoria nodded, her manner softening. Richard and I have had a long-standing acquaintance, and our interactions have often been enlightening. He is not a straightforward man to deal with, and he usually gets away with far too much. I respect your guts in confronting him. Thank you, I answered really honestly. Though it hasn't been easy, I'm beginning to perceive things more precisely now. Victoria said, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. Although I cannot change what has happened, I can most surely be a friend. I said, feeling a genuine warmth towards her, and expressed my gratitude. Having someone to chat with who truly understands makes a world of difference. We spent some more time seated together, chatting about more subdued subjects and savoring the peace of the beach. From the turbulence of the preceding several days, it was a wonderful change, and Victoria's presence gave peace I sorely needed. Thank you for asking. That something seems to be sinking in relieves me somewhat. I'm quite tired of being told that it's insignificant. Knowing this, Victoria nodded. You see, Richard doesn't know what to do about you. He has never been turned down before and is not experienced handling morality. Has he yet extended any other invitations to you or others? Money offers to you? Indeed, right before I descended, 250,000 people, Victoria mumbled. Bloody moron. I advised him not to, but he's used to paying enough till he gets what he wants. He will lose personally as well as in business. Victoria listened carefully as I told about my marriage and children, and turned out to be easy to chat to. She was obviously well-educated and smart. She said she was surprised Claire had done, thinking there had to have been some disagreement or agreement between us to let our marriage open. I said aloud, no, simply a surprise ambush. She appears absolutely enthralled with the man. He has that impact on women, Victoria said. Although everything is quite lovely, if you know what I mean, the depth doesn't run very far. We kept talking, and as the conversation progressed, I felt somewhat better. You do adore her, I suppose. How you responded at breakfast and with the offerings. For you, Victoria noted, it must be heartbreaking. I shrugged, tried to ignore. I apologize for having any influence in it, not your doing. I only have to survive another night before maybe fleeing. Victoria grinned once more, her smile getting more and more distracting. Perhaps I might help with that. When I showed up for dinner, they weren't taken aback. Claire was seated apart from Richard now. Though I turned off all of Claire's attempts at small conversation, the dinner was quite normal. When Claire asked whether I wanted to have an early night, I claimed I had plans and grinned amiably. She seemed perplexed, And that bewilderment grew as Victoria walked around the table, locking arms with me as I stood. We filed out of the room together. We strolled down to the beach's cabanas. The idea at first was to leave together and let Claire taste her own medicine. But Victoria felt really lovely in my arms, and at least some of the annoyances of the past 24 hours vanished when we kissed. I considered staying on the moral high ground, that sense of right and wrong, but I turned to look at her then. Claire perhaps wanted me to be more adaptable. And going from what I knew, Claire had already breached our marriage vows. Tonight with Victoria was so great. Her attractiveness was only one aspect. She had a calm sexual energy. Every movement looked to be exactly timed and coordinated. She was a master of her trade, really. Remarkably, I felt no shame, and neither did Claire. Any trace of guilt was eliminated with the burning, terrible memory of Claire with Richard. Off the island, I had made good time getting the supply boat, a taxi to the airport, and then linking with a regular flight home. I picked up the kids and tried to catch up with their weekend events. I made a hazy narrative about their mother and me fighting, but reassured them we would sort things out. Claire staggered into the house, lugging our big bag behind her. As I advised, we eat out. The children dashed upstairs yelling, "Hi, Mom!" Claire gracefully grinned. Eating out appeals to me. Give me some time to get ready. Recalling her prior comments, I said, I would rather you not. Claire, I suppose it would be better if it were just us tonight. I'm not sure how much time I will have with them. Claire's considerations. When I met Richard, there was a click. Almost like a character from an old movie, he seemed so elegant, confident, forceful, and charming. It was odd how David lacked those things later on. Lunches and later evenings followed our flirtation. It was thrilling. I felt like I may fly. I nearly melted when he kissed me goodnight after dinner, but I told him I was resolved not to cheat. Richard highlighted some of his open partnerships, and I asked David whether he might go for that. When he suggested the layout, I felt the money would cover it. Robert was encouraging as we started weekend planning. The weekend began really well. I nearly pulled out of the entire plan since I had such a nice time with David. Richard advised me to let go and promised me everything would be good if only I had. Robert encouraged me to allow David some time to cool off, even though he both expected he would reject the proposal. David's response, though, was not anything we had anticipated or prepared for. The most unexpected was his clearly disturbed appearance. Though Richard promised me everything would work out, I longed to follow him. Victoria had been scheduled to meet with David, hence I believed she had stayed with him when she did not return. After months of waiting, I felt liberated and ready to spend time with Richard. I knew I was following through the instant he kissed me. He showed me to his bedroom. Richard felt quite unique when he undressed me with such care. Feeling confused, I woke up in the middle of the night thinking I was resting next to David, only to be startled by someone else. As I pondered where David was and how he was feeling, guilt flooded over me. Richard woke up and kissed me. Thus, my thoughts must have bothered him, quickly diverting his guilt as he made love to me once more. I was ecstatic, as it had been all I had dreamed for. Thanking Richard for a fantastic evening, I kissed him gratefully. Looking forward to another evening together, we dropped down the stairs and into the dining room holding his hand. Then I saw David, though, and everything broke. As David burst, panic shot inside me. This was not how it was meant to go. Clearly, he hadn't been with Victoria. I hadn't expected this degree of wrath. Even without that, I expected him to be agitated, perhaps storm off. The most frightening thing about his icy wrath was David was too orderly, too reasonable about it all. He destroyed every argument I had rehearsed with Richard, weakening them even in my own hearing. Though I realized I was failing horribly, I tried to hold my ground. I slumped, screaming hysterically, when David went. Richard looked dubious for the first time. When I at last got myself under control and looked for David, he vanished. Robert and Richard suggested then calling off all activities and providing much more money to try to save the matter. Later that day, when we gave David the extra money, I saw a startling change. Richard's presence began to decrease, his once dominant power weakening. Though now that plan lay in ruins and uncertainty permeated everything, I had believed his guarantees that our adventure would not permanently sour my marriage. Frustrated and illogical, I blurted out that I might stay on the island longer and keep having fun. only to be startled by Robert's cool but direct reaction. "Claire, please avoid being naive. You ought to ask for pardon if you wish even a slight possibility of saving your marriage. Since David isn't someone who will readily modify his opinion, be true and honest." To be honest, I cannot dispute with a word he mentioned during breakfast. Robert telling Richard they wouldn't be coming shocked me even more. He underlined that David was a good man who didn't deserve any of the difficulties we had made, and asked Richard to take his advice and think about growing up. David showed up for dinner that evening, which astounded me, but he turned away all my attempts to engage him. I broke down seeing him go with Victoria. Though I wanted to go after him, what could I possibly say? Having explained our fling as nothing more than a passing fancy during the trip, I had urged him to act just that. Angry and betrayed, I couldn't help but remember how I had done far worse to David with my public, methodically planned acts. Maybe I was deserving of this. Perhaps our joint adultery will help to save our marriage. Without David drove home the fact of how much danger my marriage was in, the plane trip back home was. He had left the island before we arrived, and I hadn't really spoken to him since then. The weight of my acts started to seep in, and shame surged over me in waves. Ideas of the money helped me to calm myself. Whose right mind would reject down such an amount after all? But my usually steady tears became uncontrollably violent, sobbing, almost like panic. Robert and Helen developed growing worries about my welfare. David was back home, but turned down my invitation to eat out with the kids and him. I hardly kept myself together until they left. Then I fell into yet another tearful episode. Being left off the dinner seemed like a warning about my future. Once I cooled off, I pondered about what to say to David when he got back. Everything I considered sounded exactly like he had said, and I felt too embarrassed to ask my friends or mother for guidance. When we returned home at last, the children followed their usual behavior, withdrew to their beds, lost in their phones and video games. I was standing in the kitchen, fixating on Claire. To me, she sounded to be a total stranger. She nearly muttered, "Can we talk?" Correctly, I mean. I shrugged, considering we had to have this talk sooner or later, and wondering why we should wait to start it. "I apologize, David." She started here. "I said it was only one time, and I'll be yours every bit as dutifully as I was before the weekend. I carried on for the cash. It might turn our family's life around. I worked on it for us." "You did it for yourself," I shot back, my voice firm but disappointed. "We were doing okay. Money had no bearing on things. You jumped right into his bed, eager. Had to have been exciting. Whined, ate, and affectionate. All, everyone had a great time." "You exaggerate." Claire insisted defensively. "It doesn't mean anything. Claire, you really ought to skip phase A. You know this." "It is ridiculous," I shot back, bitterness coloring my voice. That was not a one-off, inadvertent, fascinating moment in bed. It was a deliberate turn from loyalty. Arrogant, selfish, all the qualities I detest. "And right now I really despise you," Claire objected, saying you followed the same approach with that tart. "No, I hadn't," I replied aggressively, as nothing seemed to be sinking in with you, and sought retribution. "Long enough for you to observe the effects on me, your head would still be buried in your arse. If I had a devoted wife, I would never have thought of it. Nevertheless, I hope it stung, truly hurt. Then you might have a faint sense of what I feel. Except I didn't arrange it ahead of time, and it wasn't done with everyone else's knowledge, so I completely screwed. Regarding which, how long did your covert scheme take to implement? And was that your first trip with him?" Her eyes grew wide at my query. Then she appeared to know it needed a real and honest answer. "We had lunches together, and I knew he was interested in me." Claire started slowly, her voice carrying a combination of shame and explanation. "Robert and Helen were probably testing the waters, gently probing me about interest. Dinner was shared by the four of us, and for the first time in my marriage, I discovered another man aroused by his confidence, which was addictive. Although I battled to resist, I felt it was wrong and managed to escape an affair. Richard then proposed talking about an open relationship with you, maybe even covering partner swapping." She carried on, regretting everything. "One night we spoke briefly about it, and it was obvious you would not agree to that. Then he suggested the weekend schedule, and I reasoned that it would be justified for you by the financial guarantee. We started to get nervous as the journey drew near. Richard advised Victoria to reassure you of our intentions, though at first I wasn't interested in that concept. By then I just wanted it all to happen. I reasoned that we could bounce back from it even if you didn't quite approve. Then you disassembled all those thoughts so brilliantly over breakfast, and I started to see the whole consequence of what I had done. Her admission hung weighty in the air, broken by a stillness that said volumes about the harm done and the unknown road ahead. Was the effort worth it? My voice steady yet with a silent storm as I questioned. Claire hesitated before answering, her eyes reflecting a mix of guilt and anxiety. Of course not, no. I became enthralled in him and in what he said. I never meant to hurt you. Ah, precisely in phase D. Unintentional damage, I shot angrily back. Still, you did have fun with it. It was all over you, the way you drifted into breakfast. You are now merely stating what you believe I should find interesting. Claire's shoulders slumped somewhat, her admittance grudgingly. Sorry, the honest response is yes. I had fun. He was okay. Not more or better, only different. It was fresh, interesting, and exciting. I found him to be really charming. Though it was one-off, he was seasoned, knew what he was doing. Please do not toss us away. Don't split our family just for one-time needs. I laughed bitterly, unable to control it. Funny, that's just how I would characterize your previous actions. Broke up our family temporarily for one-time events. Not me, all of this is on you. Claire's face dropped, the weight of her acts squarely between us. The knowledge of permanent injury and the unknown future ahead sat thick in the air. You are right. I am entirely at fault here. I really am sorry. Claire begged. I love you with all my heart. Her voice carried a desperate note. Not quite all of it is, though. You handed part of it to him, or even if you say you didn't, your love still wasn't enough to keep committed to me. How am I to ever trust you once more? I was very naive since I never considered you could be able of what you performed. I suppose I know not very much about you. Never mind pretending it didn't happen, I answered, my words tinged with hurt and incredulity. I can hardly bring myself to look at you. Claire drew back in amazement, her eyes wide with pain. That is not what you may mean. You love me, I know you do. I never dreamed I might lose you. No, you simply considered yourself and your needs rather than me and the children. Sometimes love is insufficient, I said fiercely, trying to control the rage bubbling within me. I inhaled deeply to cool myself and carried on following a protracted stop. Claire, listen, it would never be the same even if we stayed together and worked on pasting past this. You destroyed the link of care we had for one another and the trust. Recall that. Above all, we committed to look after the kids and each other. We vowed to keep one another pain-free. I never ever expected the person causing it to be you. David, you are loved. I would do anything to correct a major error I committed. It cannot mean, Claire begged, her voice faltering with desperation, us divorcing. You threatened me to get your own way and tore my heart. You cannot treat someone you really love in that way. I changed my tone, one that combined hurt with resignation. Claire looked at me shocked and without words. We need to discuss the children. I carried on, shattering the still silence. They would be better off in split rather than dysfunctional homes, in my opinion. From this vantage point, divorce is the best choice. Though I realize you would probably get custody, try not to prevent me from visiting them. Better still for you as well. They listened to me. You're not very adept at establishing limits, I said, frowning to note the irony of the remark. And they're testing you already. If every one of us could remain in their life, things would be better for us all. Claire shrugged, not sure she could answer coherently. Claire, really? Whatever comes about, don't block me from seeing our children. Do not turn me off. I am not the terrible man in this scene. I love them to bits and am decent for them. As yet, you have not seen me furious. We'll damage each other in the process, and I'll battle you to the last end. Squander all of our money on attorneys. She nodded gravely. I would never engage in that. You are a wonderful dad. Kids do need you. They will want you to keep traveling with them and helping their sports teams. Surprised by her candor in that moment, I turned to face her. I had never thought she was not trying to control me or justify her behavior. Claire, pay attention. Really though, you know who I am and you're tossing away Faye Z. Why does one do this? I can only imagine deep down you wanted us to split. God, never that, Claire said, her voice full of regret. Not one exists. I became self-centered, persuaded myself I could have anything extra. I considered one way or another I could be able to keep you. Why hadn't you stopped me that evening? Why did you go? I had to get out since I couldn't breathe, but then it didn't seem to make any difference. I answered, my voice weighed with resignation. You already lost me since you desired another man and were ready to do anything to obtain it. Long before you laid in his bed, that talk killed us. Perhaps it was over when you got to work organizing. You put it up and spent weeks corresponding with him. It's simpler to finish tasks if you let you go, rather than if you quit under pressure. Now there is no turning back. And thus started the disintegration of our marriage, broken in less than 4 days. Fortunately, we were able to split without involving counseling. Claire seems not driven to examine her behavior. It is unfortunate in certain respects. I had thought that professional assistance may clear her delusions. She did honor a promise once. We finally split the children's custody somewhat reasonably. She acknowledged to them, to her credit, that everything was her fault without exploring the brutal specifics. Often making their own choices regarding where they wished to live, they were mature enough to understand the circumstances. Parents at that age start to see themselves as moneylenders and glorified taxi drivers. Though biased as I am, I believe these are amazing children who manage the split rather brilliantly. Young children can be fairly resilient. Claire was allowed to keep our house until the children were 18 under the divorce settlement. She could then either buy me out or sell it. For the children's sake, that is, to guarantee they remained in the same school, that was what I desired. Luckily, following moral guidelines paid off. Property values had skyrocketed by the time the children set off for college. Turning out to be the best investment I have ever made, Claire had to buy me out. She managed to afford it. How? After all, we divided the £250,000 in the divorce. Like with Victoria, I couldn't keep the moral high ground. Being a pragmatic man, it felt like a little price compared to the expense of a marriage and what had formerly been a content life. I launched my own web design company after leaving my job and was paid to avoid an awkward employment tribunal. Claire tried to make amends, but I had little interest. Was then ending things the wise choice? Though the terrible dangers and repercussions once feared never materialized, it was messy and there were no obvious winners. That night I knew I would never forget or pardon. One could argue that it's important to be able to appreciate the person peering back from the mirror.